Good evening, ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties. This is Alex, coming at you from the underworld, and welcome back to another episode of This weekend. Not only am I knocking out a title from my extensive TBR, but I'm reviewing a book that I'm really excited to talk about because this was the first time in my existence that my heart raced due to a book being so damned intense. Which, if you can tell by the title of this video and the thumbnail that I used, of course, I'm reviewing the supernatural thriller The Winter People by Jennifer McMahon. And I would like to bring to everyone's attention that this kick-ass book was recommended to me by the very awesome Cody Williams, who in the past has recommended some really solid horror stories. Now, before I get started, I'm here to tell you this won't be the last time I read McMahon, because this novel scared the ever-loving living hell out of me, and as soon as I finished it, I loaded up my wish list with the rest of her books. And to give you a good idea of just how terrifying this book was, let me paint a picture for you. So it's this nice, gloomy Saturday afternoon, the weekend before Christmas, and I'm sitting in my parked car reading because my husband's inside of a store doing some last-minute Christmas shopping. And although this book had already proven itself to be nothing but nightmare fuel, I thought to myself, it's the middle of the day. What's the worst that could happen? Well, since I was so invested in this story, I didn't see my husband come running up to the car with all of the crap he bought. And as soon as he knocked on the door, let me tell you, the Christmas spirit flew straight out of my ass. Well, now that you know this book can scare the spirit out of your bowels, I would just like to add that if you're a mood reader, the events in The Winter People take place in January. Also, I would like to give a fair warning that this book is extremely heavy on the subject of grief, especially when it comes down to the idea of a parent grieving for her deceased daughter. And while the daughter's death really wasn't that graphic, the mother's emotions were absolutely heartbreaking, and her struggles do take up a good portion of the book. Like, even though I'm not a parent and I'll never understand how the loss of a child might feel, I think I now have a glimpse into the world of what it's like to be a grieving parent. Aside from that, I would like to add that I buddy read this with my good online friends Hanny and Nisa, and we collectively felt like this book was pretty solid. And as we discussed everything, Henny and I laughed about how every time we thought we had it figured out, we discovered we had gone so far left we couldn't even see right in the rear view mirror. So that was a lot of fun having our brains screwed with in that way. But with that said, as always, I would just like to thank Hanny and Nisa for buddy reading this with me, as it was definitely an experience that I needed to have with friends, especially since I needed an outlet to gush about in regards to what in the hell was going on. And of course, I would like to thank Cody Williams for his recommendation, as this is a book that I will never forget. But without me rambling on any further, let's bundle up in our winter's finest and see why the people of West Hall, Vermont are afraid of an infamous landmark deep within the wilderness known as the Devil's Hand. The Winter People by Jennifer McMahon is told from multiple perspectives, one of which is from a published diary that was written in 1908 called Visitors from the Other Side, The Secret Diary of Sarah Harrison Shee, and the other perspective regards the actions of two strangers in present time. Among them, in the contemporary setting, a teenage girl named Ruthie and her little sister Fawn step into plot where they're searching for their mother who has mysteriously disappeared. Meanwhile, as they begin to uncover clues, the focus shifts to a grieving artist named Catherine who's trying to receive closure following the death of her child and husband. Yet, even though Ruthie and Catherine are unaware of each other, They both happen across a copy of Sarah's published diary that their loved ones had kept hidden from them. At this point, Ruthie and Catherine read the diary, and they discover that back in 1908, Sarah was happily married to a man named Martin, and together they raised a beautiful, loving daughter named Gertie. Yet their happiness was cut short after Martin found what Sarah believed was a cursed ring from her past. Then, upon Martin failing to rid their home of the ring, one cold January evening, Gertie came up missing. And after a lengthy search, Gertie's dead body was eventually found at the base of an old well. However, Sarah couldn't leave well enough alone because when she was a child, she had seen what was known as a sleeper, which it's eventually revealed that a sleeper is a dead person who was brought back to life for the duration of 7 days after having a ritual performed for their resurrection. But this ritual just can't be performed anywhere. Rather, it must be conducted at a forbidden place in the woods known as the Devil's Hand, which this is a rock formation that appears just as its name indicates. And while Sarah does everything necessary to bring Gertie back to life, there is a chance that if the sleeper version of Gertie kills anyone within the 7 days of its return, it will remain alive in its current state forever. Then, as the plot continues to thicken, it's revealed how the tragedy of 1908 has triggered a series of frightening and gory events that have terrorized the small town of West Hall, Vermont for over a century. And now that Ruthie has gained the attention of an unwanted outside party, she's soon to discover that she must play an important role to keep the past contained. And with the help of Catherine, she can possibly accomplish just that. The Winter People was published by Anchor Books in 2015, and it received praise from Booklist, who stated McMahon has developed a subgenre of psychological mysteries that pit female characters with humanizing strengths and vulnerabilities against old secrets posing as present dangers, forcing them to confront mystery and legend in creepily seductive settings. This mystery horror crossover is haunting, evocative, and horrifically beautiful, a triumph. On her website, McMahon explained the idea for The Winter People came about due to an improv game that she used to play with her daughter. And under one particular circumstance, McMahon's daughter created the scenario where they were to act as two adolescent sisters who woke up one morning to find their mother missing. Then, upon McMahon asking what happened to their mother, her daughter answered she was taken into the woods. In response, McMahon said that sounded like something for one of Mommy's creepy books. From there, they began to write down ideas, and the two sisters became Ruthie and Fawn. Originally, the sleeper lore of the Winter People wasn't planned. Instead, McMahon randomly came up with the idea of the sleeper while she was writing Sarah's diary, and she wrote, "The first time I saw a sleeper, I was 9 years old." And although she had no idea what a sleeper was, in order to find out, she had to continue to write to see what would happen next. Also, McMahon noted the diary entries were all handwritten as it felt more authentic to the character. Surrounding this time, McMahon's agent encouraged her to try something different and bigger. At first, she considered writing a story set during the Civil War. Yet, one day, McMahon watched a documentary that spoke about Abraham Lincoln and Mary Todd having lost their son and how grief-struck Mary had become. Then, when it elaborated about how Mary believed their son could contact her beyond death, and she held seances in the White House, something within McMahon clicked. At this point, McMahon decided to write a story about a woman who became a spiritualist during the turn of the century, following the loss of her child. Then, as she continued to write, she discovered not only was she writing a story about a woman who could communicate with the dead, but she was also writing about a woman who could bring the dead back to life. Fun facts! Here's a few things you might not know about Jennifer McMahon. In an interview conducted by Daryl M. with the Los Angeles Public Library, McMahon explained her top 5 favorite or most influential authors included Mary Shelley, Shirley Jackson, Daphne du Maurier, Patricia Highsmith, Sarah Waters, and as a child, her favorite book was Harriet the Spy. When asked what book she believed everyone should read, she answered, "We Have Always Lived in the Castle" by Shirley Jackson, as Merricat Blackwood is her favorite fictional character ever. McMahon's website states she lives in Florida with her civil union partner, Drea, and their daughter. She is currently the New York Times bestselling author of 12 suspense novels. Also, she admits that while she does enjoy the horror genre, she is a huge scaredy cat. In an interview for the Horror Writers Association in regards to women in horror, McMahon explained, "I was an anxious and fearful kid who grew into an anxious and fearful adult. And I think a big part of what drew me to horror movies and fiction then was the control. I could close the book or turn off the TV. I could turn on all the lights if I needed to. Facing my fears on the page or on the screen made me feel brave in a way I didn't feel in real life. It allowed me to face danger and terror in a safe way. There are so many terrifying things that we are powerless to stop in real life, but in horror fiction, we get to conquer them, to triumph, and walk away from it stronger and braver." Now that we have that covered, it's time to move on to the spoiler section. If you haven't read this book before, I'm about to reveal some things that could ruin the experience for you. So if you would like to click away, all you have to do is scroll down to the comments section and you'll see a pinned comment that I have at the top with the timestamp in it. Once you click that timestamp, it will direct you away from the spoilers and bring you to the thoughts section. Now, you only have 17 seconds to do this. So, ready, set, go! Since everyone's had the opportunity to click away, I would like to talk about a few moments that scared the ever-loving living hell out of me. First up is the story that Buzz relays to Ruthie. Now, leading up to this, Ruthie and Fawn's mother has gone missing, and they begin to look around the house for clues. In the process of doing so, they find a hidden compartment in their mother's bedroom floor, and since they were never allowed into her room, they also discover that her closet has been nailed shut. But after the sisters find the wallets of 2 strangers, Sarah's diary, and a gun that were all hidden in the compartment, Ruthie calls her boyfriend Buzz to come over. Upon his arrival, Ruthie admits she was going to call the police, but after she found everything, she began to wonder if her mother was involved with something illegal. In turn, Buzz rationalizes that if she wasn't abducted by aliens, then there was likely a pretty good reason why she didn't want to be found in the first place. So after Ruthie and Buzz pry open the closet and they see nothing inside, he notes that he still can't believe Sarah lived here. Like, he knew Sarah's home was in West Hall, but he just didn't realize it was actually Ruthie's home. Furthermore, he elaborates that Sarah was a local legend, and there had been tales Sarah believed that the dead could return. But more notable, Sarah's skin body had been discovered in the field behind Ruthie's house. However, her skin was never found. And while it was never confirmed who killed Sarah, Buzz explains it was believed Martin had skinned her, and the following day, Martin's brother found him covered in blood and half crazed, where shortly thereafter, Martin killed himself. Then, as if that wasn't unsettling enough, Buzz explains his grandpa had told him that back in the day, locals claimed that they had seen someone walking around town at night wearing Sarah's skin. And due to the weird deaths that followed those sightings, people would leave offerings on their doorstep on the night of a full moon, and this was to ensure their safety. Which, since these offerings were taken and those residents were spared, to this day, some of the old timers still leave offerings for Sarah on their doorstep. Y'all, I have always been a sucker for a good urban legend, and I think what sold me on this one was the idea that Sarah had been skinned and there was possibly someone or something walking around in her flesh. Which, needless to say, due to the author suggesting this, my imagination got the better of me and it caused my irrational fear to create some pretty horrific scenarios. Specifically, it made me absolutely dread the possibility of what could be staggering around outside my house late at night, which this was a reoccurring dread I experienced every night when I had to go outside and unplug my Christmas lights. However, when I discovered that the Sarah sightings were actually Sarah herself, I did chill out to some degree. Nonetheless, the original idea continued to get under my skin, especially around bedtime. Next up is the scene when Sarah begins to communicate with Gertie. Now, at this point, Gertie had died and Sarah went into mourning, which, because of her grief, she grew to resent her husband as well as God. And even though she had wanted to commit suicide by throwing herself down the same well where Gertie had been found, she started to ponder about what Auntie had told her about spirits. Then, shortly after Gertie's funeral, Auntie came to Sarah in a dream and asked what she would do to have Gertie come back. Which, upon Sarah admitting she would do anything, Auntie told her that she was ready. At this point, Sarah recalled the envelope that Auntie had given her during her childhood, where inside that envelope she's provided with the instructions needed to bring the dead back to life for the total of 7 days. So, one night after Sarah follows the directions, Martin wakes up to find her sitting outside their bedroom closet where Gertie once played. Then, when he tells Sarah to come to bed, he hears this scratching sound come from inside the closet, which, upon him seeing the closet doorknob turn, he tells Sarah to get away from the door, yet instead of her being panicked, she calmly explains, Gertie has returned to them. From here, the following day, Sarah continues to communicate with Gertie, and Gertie is refusing to speak back. But upon Sarah asking yes or no questions, Gertie is able to knock once for yes and twice for no. And although Gertie is willing to respond in this fashion, she refuses to let Sarah see or hear her. And the kicker is, Sarah accepts it. Y'all, when Gertie refused to let herself be seen or heard, I was convinced that Sarah was actually interacting with some Lovecraftian monstrosity that had posed as her daughter. And the thing is, I was so stuck on that idea that it didn't even dawn on me that what was inside the closet could have actually been a living, breathing person whose goal was to tear Sarah's life apart, which, to be honest, that is still frightening. Anywho, the main thing that scared me here primarily regarded what could have possibly been on the other side of that closet door. And while Sarah was so absolutely happy that she was talking to what she believed was Gertie, I was screaming, "Girl, that ain't Gertie. Like, I don't know what the hell it is, but it sure as shit ain't your daughter." And oh, on top of that, the fact that this figure was hiding in the bedroom closet was so unsettling, as it totally played on the boogeyman aspect, which, as a child, the idea of something hiding in the closet terrified me. And after having read this as an adult, let me put it this way, I had trouble going to sleep. And last is the grand reveal. So, leading up to this, Sarah attended a seance that was hosted at her niece's house, where the medium explained that they had contacted Gertie, who said she didn't like what Sarah was doing. Following that, Sarah returned home to discover Gertie was missing from the closet. Also, she and Martin found where someone had ripped up all of his clothes, and she came across a note that said Martin didn't bury Auntie's bone ring like he was told. Aside from that, a more detailed story is given on Auntie, which, in this telling, it's revealed Auntie was like a mother to Sarah and her siblings, as her father had taken Auntie in as a lover after his wife died. And while Sarah and her brother loved Auntie, their sister hated her. Well, since Auntie had the reputation of being a witch, the pillars of the community gave Sarah's father an ultimatum where if he continued to see her, they would shun him. And since his well being depended on others for basic necessities, he broke it off with Auntie, who in turn became wrathful. Then, following the murder of Sarah's brother, who Auntie was believed to have killed, Sarah's father exacted his revenge on her by shooting her and burning her house down with her still inside. After gaining that backstory, Sarah found another note from Gertie that revealed she was buried with a clue that could expose her murderer. In turn, this made Sarah want to exhume Gertie, and upon her remaining adamant in digging Gertie up, Martin and his brother restrained her as they believed she had the potential to do some real damage. At last, the seventh day comes and Sarah is freed because she appears to be coping better. Yet that night, while Martin thinks Sarah's asleep, he goes to dig Gertie up because he wonders if by exhuming her, he will in fact be provided with answers. So while he's down in Gertie's grave, he turns around to discover Sarah has held him at gunpoint, and upon having this confrontation, she forces him to continue digging, where they eventually discover that Gertie's grave is empty. And Sarah finally admits that she believes Martin killed their daughter. From here, despite Martin arguing otherwise, she calls Gertie to come out, which no sooner does she do this, a figure emerges from the shadows of their house, and as Martin tries to climb out of the grave, Sarah shoots him. Nonetheless, despite his injury, he's still able to scramble off. Once Sarah's alone, Auntie confronts her and admits that she had survived the gunshot wound and fire that Sarah's father had inflicted all those years ago. And after she went to live elsewhere, she bided her time until she decided to return to Sarah's home to exact her revenge, which upon her return, she killed Gertie and orchestrated turning Sarah against Martin and vice versa. Now, at this point, Martin has circled back to their house where he sees Sarah being led out the front door by Auntie. And while Auntie's goal is to watch Sarah suffer as Gertie dies a second time, Gertie sneaks up from behind with an axe. Then, upon Gertie bringing the axe down into Auntie's head, not only does Gertie save her mother, but she secures eternal life as a little girl. Due to its tension, this whole segment scared the shit out of me, which, to give some specifics, the shadow figure emerging from the house after Sarah had told Gertie to come out filled me with a level of dread and tension that was so deep, my heart was ready to beat out of my damn chest. Especially since I was convinced that this figure was nothing more than pure evil parading around as a little girl. Then, when Sarah was confronted by Auntie, all I could do was just put the book down and say, "Are you fucking kidding me?" Then I blankly stared into the distance while realizing how frightening of a concept it is for your worst enemy to be residing in the same house with you while they pose as your dead child. So, yeah, everything about this was absolute nightmare fuel. I would like to take this opportunity to bitch about Auntie. Now, when Auntie first stepped on the page, I thought she was pretty damn badass because she was described as this powerful figure who people not only feared, but they went to her for help. Add on top of that her occult knowledge as well as her devil may care vibes, and I instantly fell in love with her because, yeah, what gay guy doesn't love a badass woman who is feared? And girl, let me tell you, when I found out Sarah's father dropped Auntie on her ass so he could stay in favor with all the uptight West Hall bastards, I was like, all right, he just pissed an Auntie cereal and shit's about to go down, and it's going to go down harder than Karen being denied an opportunity to speak with the manager. And I won't lie, when this happened, at first I felt for Auntie. However, that ship quickly sailed right the hell off to screw that shitville the moment Sarah's brother turned up dead. Then, when the grand reveal came where Auntie stepped out acting like Joan Crawford needed to hold her beer while her crazy ass was spitting, all I could do was think, damn, Auntie really does have a garbage pit where a heart should be. The Winter People is a haunting novel that delivers the perfect blend of thriller and drama, as well as the supernatural, which, due to McMahon's ability to quickly suck the reader into her world, I immediately became invested in the plot and characters. And with that in mind, I have to applaud the author for creating such a complex and original scenario where she brilliantly wove together the past and present into an unforgettable, heart pounding climax. Aside from how intense this work was, I noticed where it did present some cool symbolism, as well as quite a few themes, some of which regard how the past can affect the present, dark family secrets, grief, the bond between mother and child, and how folklore can impact reality. Character wise, the development that McMahon establishes is absolutely masterful. Like, from the moment her characters stepped onto page, they all had my full attention. And even better, I never felt like a single character was dull or annoying. Which, among everyone, although I was deeply invested with those in present time, the emotions that were detailed in Sarah's diary felt so raw and human. And as I read, the devastation that Sarah experienced after Gertie's death was so heartbreaking that I was almost moved to tears. So, with that in mind, I can say with confidence if the author wanted us to feel Sarah's hurt firsthand, she achieved her goal. Now, aside from how my heart broke for Sarah and her husband, who I think did what he thought was best, as far as the characters who existed in present time are concerned, I really loved Ruthie because she was so very brave to take matters into her own hands when it came down to solving the mystery. And on that same note, I have to applaud Fawn for being mature beyond her years and playing it cool when Candace showed up. Out of the antagonists that we were given, one of them was a complete mastermind that caused my jaw to drop. And while this antagonist was every bit of bitter and cruel as one would imagine, at first, this individual actually seduced me with their personality and their abilities, despite the fact of knowing what this individual was capable of if things went south. And while I hated to love this character for that reason, when things went down, I discovered I could also love to hate this same individual. As far as symbolism is concerned, first off, we have the bone ring that belonged to Auntie, which this ring had symbols engraved on it that translated into how life is a circle. And due to the possible supernatural elements this particular ring might have, its existence does play into folklore's tropes, which regard, of course, the cursed ring or the magical ring scenario, which I would love to elaborate a little bit more here, but if I did, that would reveal some spoilers. Nonetheless, all I can say is the bone ring is significant to the plot in regards to the circle of life. Aside from that, I felt like the fox that Martin killed was really important, especially since foxes are seen to be tricksters. And due to the events that go down, I feel like this particular fox warns that a trickster is afoot. However, the existence of the fox isn't just limited to that aspect, as it seems to be a reflection of the relationships humans have with animals or nature. For example, the text stated that when Martin cornered the fox, he felt like he was looking into his wife's eyes. Then, after killing it, he felt unsettled rather than satisfied. Fast forward to decades later, and Catherine sees a fox's pelt in an old shop while she was visiting West Hall, which this pelt could easily be from the same fox that Martin killed on the same day that Gertie died. But upon Catherine looking the fox in its glass eyes, she feels like it knows all of her secrets. Not long after that, Catherine encounters a fox in the wild that drops a dead rabbit, which she later uses for something I can't talk about here. Also, there's the symbolism of the blue dog, and aside from the iconic blue dog that was painted by Louisiana artist George Rodrigue, as I surfed around online, I discovered the blue dog represents the search for love, the human spirit, the search for eternity, and the connection between life and the afterlife. Which, considering how Gertie dreamed of the blue dog and how that was a key symbol between she and her mother, it makes sense the author would choose to utilize this figure with her work. Theme wise, a huge focus of this work shows how the past can affect the present. And like the classic ghost story, the events of the Winter People exist so the past won't be forgotten. Which, under the circumstances of its plot, although Sarah's diary was published to prove Sarah was of sound mind, as a reader, we are well aware that those who don't learn from the past are doomed to repeat it. Now, as far as the past can affect the present is concerned, this is seen in multiple ways. One of which is what happens to Auntie, and how that affects Sarah's life after she becomes a wife and mother. Then, although these tragic events happened in the early 1900s, they were so appalling that they continued to affect the residents of West Hall in modern time, which these repercussions are seen by how a few locals have kept tradition to ensure their safety. Also, it's seen again by the horror stories and current events that surround the Devil's Hand. Yet, among everyone in West Hall, the person who seems most affected is Ruthie. And this isn't only due to what she lost, but it also regards her obligations to give up her dreams so she can contain what's on her property. Also, circling back to the idea of a person becoming doomed if they don't learn from history, Catherine's grief causes her to ignore the dangers of what had been documented. Not to mention her thought process near the end alludes to her possibly exploiting the secrets of how to create a sleeper. And due to how the past seems to be repeating itself, it's safe to say Catherine's actions will affect future generations. Following that, this book presents the subject of dark family secrets. First off, this is seen by Sarah not telling Martin about her past with Auntie, which had Martin been aware of that, he could have helped her rationalize what was going on with their family. Other than that, in modern time, there's Ruthie's situation, where an event in her childhood was kept a secret. And I tend to think had Ruthie known of her past sooner, she could have been more prepared. Which there's so much I want to say here, but there's no way to do it without revealing some spoilers. However, I can say, due to what happens, the book definitely suggests to not keep secrets from your family, especially if those secrets could bring understanding in regards to difficult situations. Aside from that, the subject of grief is so heavy with this work. As a matter of fact, it's so heavy it's almost smothering. And while I will never be a parent, the grief that Sarah experiences when Gertie dies is so raw that I now have a good idea of what a mother or parent might experience when their child is taken from them. Adding on to that, we also see how grief is processed differently for everyone. But due to how Sarah and Catherine react compared to how Martin and Gary react, we are shown that while men do in fact suffer from depression and they do mourn, the act can be so much more intense for mothers, as Sarah and Catherine had gone as far as to contemplating suicide. Yet, unlike Sarah, not only was Catherine coping with the loss of her child, but she was also coping with the loss of her husband, which left her entirely alone with no one to confide in. And while this book explores the darkest aspects of Sarah and Catherine's thoughts, it's evident that no amount of help or reasoning can pull Sarah or Catherine out of their depression. Furthermore, it's suggested when someone gets as distraught as Sarah or Catherine, they can't really be held responsible for their actions, as they are simply trying to find a solution to rid themselves of their pain. Another aspect of this book regards how folklore can impact reality. For example, in the early 1900s, after the tragic events that befell Sarah's farm, eyewitnesses saw Sarah roaming around town at night. And because of the dangers that surrounded these sightings, locals began the tradition of leaving food out for her on the nights of a full moon, which they believed in turn could ensure their safety. Now, while this seems like nothing more than an urban legend that would quickly die off, this tradition actually stays around for generations to come. And at one point, it's noted that some of the seniored people in town still follow that tradition in current time. Which to me, this indicates the power that lore can hold over people and how it can cause them to uphold those traditions even though some traditions are insignificant to what's really going on. So, with that in mind, I feel like this shows the power that legends can hold over society. At the end of the day, the winter people didn't gross me out. However, there is a strong feeling of dread that never lets up, and because of how intense that dread is, there were quite a few creepy moments and scares that really made this become one of the scariest books I had ever read. The Winter People by Jennifer McMahon is a novel that used a great balance of drama, suspense, mystery, and pure horror. And because of how McMahon was able to be so very original with her presentation and the blending of genres, I feel like this work should be in a class all on its own. Also, due to how excited I was over its twists and turns, this is one of those circumstances where I wish I had the ability to read this for the first time over again, as it was one hell of a fun experience. But at the end of the day, if you feel like you can handle the ideas of child death and grieving parents, and you're looking for an absolutely frightening tale that will make you lose sleep, then I do highly recommend The Winter People, especially in the dreary days of January. Now that we're at the end of this episode, I would just like to note that if you go to the description section, you'll notice that I have a link for my Patreon, as well as another link so you can become a member on this channel, which you have the opportunity to become either a ghoulie, a ghosty, or a long-leggedy beastie. And of course, all of the perks are mentioned in those links. Also, I do have links to my Facebook, Instagram, and Threads available in there as well. So if you want to hit me up on one of those media platforms, you can. And if you have not subscribed to this channel, be sure to subscribe and click that notifications bell because I do have more videos coming in the near future. So until we see each other again, I hope you have a great week and sweet nightmares.